Okay, so welcome to this tutorial on how to set up Photoshop to arrange 4 different files on the same screen and then add some text, and we're all kind of learning about Aperture. So what I did is I made an Aperture folder, and I have a student card here. So Darren shot the JPEG and the NEF files, and we're going to go through and pick the files that we want and drag them over. I just need 4. So I want the open aperture, the closed aperture outside, and the open aperture and the closed aperture inside. So I'm just going to kind of cruise through that one. We have me in the background, so we'll try to get a clean one. Here's that one. That one looks good. So here is our open aperture. And then towards the end here, let's look at the last one. And this is our closed aperture. Okay, perfect. We'll drag both of those over. And then I'm going to grab my NEF files for inside the classroom. We'll look at this one. And this should be open aperture. Yep, looks good. We'll grab that one. And then we'll see the very last one. This should be closed aperture. And we'll grab that one. And yes, it is going to be quote unquote blurry, but I think better would be to call it smeary. What is happening here is the shutter was open because the aperture was closed. So the aperture is the hole. The shutter is how long light is being allowed to come into the camera. So this could have been across, maybe a full second that light was coming in. And what happens if somebody moves, either the camera operator or the subject, you'll get this kind of smearing of light. So we're going to do a light painting project that really drives home the idea of what a slow shutter is. But the faster the shutter, the more it's going to freeze. So we're going to drag this over on purpose. We don't care that it's a smeared image. And this one, with the aperture open, you may have had enough light to freeze it. And we're going to look at the shutter times based on how open or closed the aperture was. So there's that. We have our 4 images. And I'm going to open them in Photoshop. So I'm going to click the top one, hold Shift, and click the bottom one. Now all of them are selected. I can control click them and say open with Photoshop. And I have Photoshop open in the background. And what's going to happen is it'll open up as tabs across the top here. Close this out. So what I wanted to point out up here is your F number and how long in seconds that the shutter was open. So this was 1/4000th of a second because the aperture was wide open. It was bright and sunny outside. ISO was at 360. That's the chip gain, and that may change from shot to shot, and it does. And I should have locked off that when I was talking to you guys, but this one is 800. And the 35 millimeter, that's the length of the lens, so this is a fixed prime lens. But you're seeing a very fast shutter speed here. 1/30th of a second is still kind of fast. It's actually kind of slow. So 1/30th of a second still froze the motion. There wasn't a whole lot of things moving. This shot here, we're at 1/25th of a second. That's the shutter, and the iris is wide open. And then this one here, we're at 1/5 of a second, very slow, and it's almost a second. And then if something moves, whether you or the subject moves, you get this kind of smeary thing going on. But the other thing that we're learning about is that at an f1.8, you're going to get this shallow depth of field thing going on in the background. At an f22, you're going to get this really sharp background. So look at the difference between the two. It's very apparent. This is really isolating the subject with depth of field, and the background goes out of focus. This is giving everything in focus, where things start to get a little distracting in the background if they're not awesome. So you be the judge as the photographer. That's typically why I shoot the aperture priority mode. I'm usually going about isolating my subject, and we have a pencil sharpener going on in this video. Okay, so here again you're seeing it, shallow depth of field, isolating the subject. Here we have a little deeper depth of field. Note he's at an f10 here. Up here he's at an f22. At an f22 the background's going to be more in focus. At an f10 it's going to be less in focus. And everything is kind of smeary moving in this one because the shutter speed was kind of slow. So the shutter opens, chick, and you move a little bit, chick, it closes, and if the movement happens, then you're going to get this light smearing thing in the image. So there's a difference between out of focus, like the background here is out of focus, and then moving. So, when you think movement, you're thinking shutter. When you think blur focus, you're thinking aperture, and setting the focus correctly within that that z-axis. So here the focus is set in the foreground, the background is out of focus. So that's the stuff that we're learning by doing this project. So I just wanted to kind of have those. I'm not going to retouch any of these, but I will open them all. So again, I'm going to click the top one and hold shift and click the bottom one. That'll select all of them. Another way to do it is to Command A. That should select all as well. If none of them are selected, I guess you can't select none of them. But here's a Command A that selects all, and then Open Images. So we're going to see them all across the top as they open up in these tabs across the top here. The next thing we're going to do is figure out what the dimensions are of this thing. So how many pixels wide checkerboard style and by how many pixels tall checkerboard style. So I can go into my image size, and that's Command Option and then I. And what it's showing me is in inches. I'm going to swap that over to pixels, but you see it up where it says dimensions right up there. Here's pixels. So you see 6,000 by 4,000. Now if we're going to do the math on this, we want to make a box so that we're going to put these images maybe side by side or top to bottom. So we're gonna make a big box to put all this stuff in with a new Photoshop file, and then we're going to copy and paste these images into the new Photoshop file. So 6,000 by 4,000. Let's do the math. So calculator, and we're just double them. That's like basic math. So we're looking at 12,000 by 8,000. So no calculator. I don't know why I did that. So 12,000 wide by 8,000 tall. Now I'm going to cancel this, and I'll say File, New, and I'm going to make it 12,000 by 8,000. Sometimes you'll get pixels that aren't quite as round, like 6,000 by 4,000. It makes sense to calculate how many pixels you need in the box that you're going to be designing. But we're going to take a look at the settings up top here. So I can just do it right here. So instead of inches, I'm going to set it to pixels, and then my width I'm going to set to 12,000, and my height I'm going to set to 8,000. And that looks good. We're going to create it. So if I look here, image size, or Command Shift I, now it's telling me that I have a 12,000 by 8,000 pixel box. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste each of these into the box. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to say, use my marquee selection tool. Command A selects all. Command C is going to copy what I've selected. And then I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to Command V, paste in. I'm going to use my Move tool to move this over to the top corner. And now I'm going to do it for the next one. Command A, Command C, click, Command V, move. Command A, selecting with the rectangular marquee. Command C, copy those pixels. Command V, paste those pixels into our full size layout. And here's the last one. Command A, Command C, click over, Command V. I have a quick layout built where we're seeing the shallow depth of fields on the left and the deeper depth of fields on the right. And what I want to do is also add text to show my aperture and my shutter speed here. So I'm just going to limit it to that. I'm not going to do the focal length, which was 35mm, and then everybody's probably going to have a differing ISO because I didn't ask you guys to lock those off. So we'll just do aperture and shutter as text. So we're going to use the text tool. But we need to know what each of these are. So I'll go to my first one, and you can go to File, File Info, and that's a whole lot of key commands. So it is Option is the first key, Shift is the second key, Command, and then I, and that should bring up file info. There we go. So it's telling me that my camera data, this was the 1/8, and the exposure one was 1/4000th of a second. You know, this might be easy to copy. I wonder if we can click and drag. No, it doesn't allow me to copy. That's a bummer. It'd be cool if we could just click and drag it instead of having to type it in. I'll cancel this. Let me try something else. If you go into the raw filter that we saw in the beginning, you see it again. So let's go to camera raw filter. And can I copy this? No. Okay, bummer. So we're just going to do it with the text tool. If we go to, let's just, I forget already. So file info, F18 and 1/4000. So that's what we're going to do. I'll go back over here. We'll use the text tool. I'm going to click here. And it's looking like it's a very small font. So we're going to correct all that up here. I'm going to say, let's go with 200. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, it's kind of big. Let's do like 100. 100. And I hit enter, and now that commits it. And let's make it white. So I'm going to click this little arrow that flip-flops the colors. So now I want it to be a white font. And I like to use Helvetica. So we're going to use Helvetica Bold. Helvetica Bold. And then I'm going to say this was an F1.8. And you know what? I'm just going to enter it right underneath it. 1/4000 of a second. And I'll leave it right like that. I'm going to use my move tool now. So I've made a layer. There's this background layer, 4 different photo layers, and then a text layer above all of them. So this works in a stacking order. This is the topmost layer. If I was to drag it under all these layers, it would disappear off the screen because it's beneath them. So it needs to be above them in order to see it. And then you can use the selection tool, and because auto select is already up, if I click on something, it's going to select differing layers. So I will be moving that instead of my text. If I want to select my text, I have to click directly on it, and then I can move that around. So let's get it so that it's in a nice place. And then what I'm actually going to do is copy it 4 times. Copy and paste it. So I can select that layer, and maybe rather than copy it, I'll duplicate it. So this is a new layer icon, but if you click and drag this onto it, it will make a copy. I can also hold shift and click and select 2 and then drag it down, and now I've made 2 copies at once. And then if I wanted to make 4, I could hold shift, hold shift and make more, but I needed 4. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this layer, and I'm going to move it. I'm going to select this layer, and I'm going to move it. I'm going to select this layer, and I'm going to move it. And this is getting busy over here, so you might need to select, put it where it needs to go. Or what you could do is leave it kind of how it is everywhere else. And then what we can do is add a drop shadow. So if I double click this area, not on the text but outside of the text on the bar, it'll bring the layer style panel up, and we can add a drop shadow. And then I'm going to click on this drop shadow panel, and I want it to be, so it's got this like slight outline now. Let's give it more opacity, and that's a thicker one, and then distance wise we'll kind of give it more of a drop. So this is 10 pixels, and it's kind of giving it it stands out a little bit better. And you can play with it if you wanted to play with like the different, how it's spreading and how it's looking, where it falls, maybe eliminating global light, so play with it if you wanted to kind of get a good look for yourself. But Undo that. What did I do? It won't let me undo it. That's interesting. I've never done that before, but I'll say OK. And now I should be able to move this whole thing. OK, so there's that. And then I think we can copy the effects around too. So if I go here, Control click, and copy layer style, I can go boom and hold the Command key this time, not the Shift key. The Shift will select everything in between. The Command key will select independently each and not this one. And then if I hold Control, like right clicking, and click on this, and we're going to paste the layer style. So now they all have the same drop shadow. So that's kind of, I could have did the drop shadow on the first thing and then copied and pasted it 3 other times, and then that would have, copied the drop shadow stuff over, but I did it a different way. So now we just got to make sure that all of our data is correct. So this is the 1.8, this should be the 1.8, but over here, this is probably going to be, I think it was the 22, and I think this was 10, but we'll verify. We'll go back here, this, let's go to this one, and file info. That was F22, so we cancel, jump back over here, and we can use our text tool now to get back in here. So we're going to go F, and we got to be hovering over this area, and now that's selecting. If I was to click anywhere else, it's creating a new text box. So I'm going to Command Z, or escape, cancel the text, and that gets rid of this layer. So I'm going to jump in here, and this we want to be 22. And then I did not get the shutter. I should have. Let me see. Command Option Shift I. Shutter was 1/30. Can I click over? Nope, it won't let me. And we're going to go here, and this is 1/30. And I'm going to go to this one. This is a 1/8. Command Option Shift I. This is 1/8, 1/20, 1/125. And then this one, we're going to go Command Option Shift I, and we're grabbing it's a 1/8, F10, 1/5. F10, and this is 1/5. Okay, so now we're getting a good picture as to like what's going on. When you're at an F1.8, the iris is open. You get a shallow depth of field. Because the iris is wide open, you're dumping a lot of light in on that sensor. So you need a faster shutter in order for it to not overexpose. Like over here, it's starting to overexpose. If this was a slower shutter, like 1/30, and we had it at a 1/8, this would be a white frame. It would just be totally overexposed, blown out. Kind of like we're seeing here. This is like overexposed. You don't get what's going on that computer screen. It's just too much light, and it's blowing out the sensor. Over here, we stopped down. We're at an F22. We're getting way better depth of field. Everything's in sharp focus basically. But because our iris is very small, it's a pinhole, very, very small, where it's wide open here, it's very closed down, you have a little pinhole, you need more time for light to hit the sensor. So this is 1/130th of a second versus 1/4000th of a second. So these two are giving you a clear understanding of aperture or iris. They both mean the same thing. The aperture is the blades. I'm sorry, the aperture is the hole, the iris is the blades. So wide open versus closed down and what it does. So basically you think aperture, you think depth of field. Is it going to be shallow and one thing in focus, or is it going to be deep and all things in focus? And then down here, we're seeing this, same thing, but we're starting to get too slow on our shutter. So this is acceptable. This is getting close to where you start to see motion blur. This is acceptable. It's going to freeze motion, freeze motion, freeze motion. But over here, 1/5 of a second is too slow. So when the shutter's open and you move or they move, you get this like smeary light thing happening. It's not focus. you can call it blurry, but there's different types of blurry. This is a focus blur. This is a motion blur. So those are the two things that I think you're really going to drive home through this exercise. So at this point we have text. We have 4 different images up, and what we'll do is say File. We're going to save this as a JPEG. Actually, we're going to save it as 2 things. So right now it's an untitled PSD. The Photoshop document, I'm going to click to this view, clicks this down arrow, and then you guys are saving on your H drive, and that might take a little while to do the saving, but I made in my pictures folder this folder Aperture, and I got all my files in there. So I'm going to save it in the same folder for the project. I'm going to call it today's date, 2018 10 23, and we'll call this Aperture, same thing, and we're going to save it. So we're saving the Photoshop file, and the Photoshop file is going to be all of the different layers and the text layers and all the different images that you bring in. So it remembers all of your different layers. So when you open a PSD, you need only Photoshop, the program, the application, can open a PSD file. It is not a picture file. You wouldn't be able to open this on the internet. Like the internet can natively open a JPEG file, but it can't open a PSD. A PSD file only opens in Photoshop, and it saves all your layer information. So that's important. If you wanted to come back and retouch your layout or move things around, save a PSD file. And then when you want to commit that file, you're going to save it as a JPEG. One more thing, I'm going to resize it because this thing is actually ridiculously huge. So we're going to go to image size, back to where we were in the beginning, and that's Command Option I. And I use image sizing all the time, so I know that key command by heart. So we're going to actually go pixels here and know what pixels we're using. It's way too big. There's no television monitor that's that big or computer screen that's that big right now. So we're going to dial it down to 1920. 1920 by 1280 is what that works out to be. So as long as this lock is on, it'll do the appropriate proportioning here. So 1920 by 1280, and we'll say OK. So it's going to look like it gets really, really small back here. Boom, it's small, but it's not actually small. The pixels is still going to be sharp, so we can just zoom in. This is showing us that we're kind of zoomed out right now. So if I hit Command plus, it'll zoom in a little bit. See how it's changing down there? Command minus zooms out, or Command 0 will fill the screen with the pixels. So zooming, Command plus zooms in, Command minus zooms out, Command 0 fills the screen, and I think there's an actual pixels one. That's all under the view menu. Fit to screen is 0, 100%. So this is like the actual pixels. No scaling is Command 1. So that's what it'll look like. So it's actually a really pretty big image on this sized monitor. All right, so now that we've resized it, we'll save it. File, save as, and we don't want the PSD this time. We're going to make it a JPEG file, and that's what we're going to submit to Google Classroom. So there's our JPEG file. We're going to save, and you can just leave that quality-wise. It'll be okay. Say okay. So if I go back out to Finder, not sure what that was. Interesting. Here is our JPEG. If I hit the spacebar, it'll preview it, and that's what I just created, and that's what I'm going to submit to Google Classroom. And that's going to do it for this tutorial.